Hi everyone, I'm Jessisa and welcome to Dark History of Sweden. Last week we talked about Sankt Lars Asylum. If you haven't seen that one, I recommend you do. Everything will make more sense if you watch that one first. There will be a link up in the corner and of course at the end of this video. But let's get started on talking about some patients at Sankt Lars Asylum. Now we are going to get into some medical records and notable patients. Let's start off with a famous one. Axel Erik Hermelin is a Swedish author and translator, born 22nd of June 1860. He is most famous for translating Persian poetry of Sufic poets from the years of 1000 to 14,000 AD. But he also translated all kinds of things from Latin, German, Persian, and many more languages. Most of the texts he translated were translated while he was at Sankt Lars Asylum. Hermelin studied at Uppsala University from the year of 1878 to 1880. Afterwards, in 1883, he traveled to North America where he was enlisted in the North American Army. And in 1885, he got kicked out of the army because of his alcoholism and other behaviors. November 24th, 1886, he enlisted in the British Army and spent 6 years in India, before he once again got kicked out of the army. Hermelin had traveled a lot to many different countries, like America, India, Australia, Jamaica, Germany, and Persia. February 20th, 1909. At 49 years old, his family placed him at Sankt Lars to treat his alcoholism. He was known to party and would often go out and spend all his money on alcohol. One of his treatments was that he got 1 Pilsner a day. After 1.5 years at Sankt Lars, he escapes. For the first time. He ties his sheets together and climbs out the window. He has 2 suits on. When he is in Malmö, he sells one and buys alcohol for the money. The police somehow finds him, calls the hospital and tell them where he is. This happened several times throughout the 35 years that he stayed there. He never really got any punishments from this, since he came from a family with a lot of money who paid a lot to have him there. In the doctor's note, they had written that he was the incarnation of stupidity and ignorance. Hermelin died at Sankt Lars in November of 1944, at the age of 84. Now we are going to talk about some non-famous male patients. The first one we'll talk about is Anders, who was hospitalized in 1879 the first time. Then in the 1900, he was placed at Asylum, at Sankt Lars Asylum, at the age of 49. Anders got himself into a lot of trouble, with both stealing and arson. He ended up in prison and seemed very calm and didn't start any trouble, but was later on believed to need special help at an asylum. That is when he is sent to Sankt Lars. The doctors and nurses perceived him to be very unreliable, quiet, and slow, which also explains why he moved back and forth between the calm and half-calm buildings. Most of the time he was treated with medical restraints. He then died of unknown reasons in 1928. Next up is Johan. Johan was found guilty of arson and was sentenced to death by Malmö County. He was then transferred to Sankt Lars in 1914 and ended up at Stormen, where he usually was in medical restraints. As the years went on, he got worse. And at the end of his life, he started to hear voices from the cellar. These voices were telling him how he would die. I actually don't know how he died, but he did die in 1928. Most often, the asylum only had patients over the age of 18, but in one case, they actually had a 10-year-old child. The child was said to be unruly, simple-minded, and aggressive. At the time, this was incurable, but today we know that it was probably ADHD. Many of the patients back then had ADHD, autism, or something that we know today isn't something that would hinder someone from having a normal life. But back then, that was out of the normal and something that they didn't know what it was. There is a lack of medical records on female patients. While there are pages upon pages on male patients, there are barely half a page of medical records or notes on the female patients. Something that was normal at the time was hysteria, a diagnosis many women got during the late 18th and early 19th century. It meant that they had an overwhelming emotional period of stress. But otherwise, there isn't much known about the female patients. Some had hysteria, some were schizophrenic, and some had been abused and traumatized. I will tell you about 3 known female patients. The first 2 just to show how little there is known about the female patients, and the third one is a well-known first-class patient. Just to show you why some female patients would end up at Sankt Lars. Ida was a first-class patient from 1904, but then her money ran out and she was moved to the Calm building, where she spent 4 years. She was then moved to Asylum, but was later on diagnosed with breast cancer and depression, and was moved to a nursing home. But the last part of her life she spent at Asylum, and was then buried at Sankt Lars graveyard in an unmarked grave. This is a perfect example of how little we know about the female patients. Tilda came to Sankt Lars in 1924. She was quite troublesome, and they hypothesized that she probably had been subjected to abuse or some sort of assault. The other only thing we know about her is that she has 2 sisters who suffered from hysteria. There is one female patient we know a little more of, but only because of how she got there. Maria Rybeck was staying at the top building, a first-class patient. She was very calm and well-liked by both patients and the staff. But how she got there is quite interesting. Maria was born at Stockholm's castle. She was quickly adopted and got a good education. When she was 21, she already was a housemistress at a school. She fell in love with a man who didn't reciprocate her feelings. Heartbroken, she ran down the streets of Stockholm, screaming and crying. According to some sources, she was naked during this, but there's nothing to support this as fact. After this, she was deemed not mentally stable enough and was to be treated at a hospital. They didn't think she could be in Stockholm, and since Sankt Lars was a well-known institution, she was placed there for treatment by her family. Here she stayed until her death in 1955. That is all I had on some patients that stayed at Sankt Lars Asylum. Next week, I think I will continue on with some Swedish mental asylums. So make sure you're subscribed and hit that bell so you don't miss it. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourself and each other, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!